Welcome to Trib Talk. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce with the Salt Lake Tribune. The young hero of Orson Scott Card's best-selling sci-fi novel finally has made it to the big screen. Hollywood's version of Ender's Game opens today in theaters everywhere, but Card's recent statements about gay marriage and homophobia have gotten as much play as the film starring Harrison Ford. And today on Trib Talk, we're talking about Orson Scott Card, his written work, including the science fiction classic Ender's Game, the new film, and the broader issue of separating the art from the artist. And joining me on the Google Hangout now is Robert Maxwell. He's curator of the Orson Scott Card Collection at Brigham Young University, and he's joining us from his office in Provo. Robert, hello. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello. You're welcome.
Also in Provo is Eric Howard. He's the designer of the new exhibit, Cards Game, which opens today at the Harold B. Lee Library in Provo. And Eric, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great. Glad to be here.
Also with us, the Tribune film critic Sean P. Means, and his film review, along with a column about separating art from the artist, are both in today's paper and at sltrib.com. Sean, great to have you back. Thanks for joining us here in the Trib newsroom.
Happy to be here.
And you can join our conversation today. Are you a fan of Card's writing? And do you separate his writing from his social commentary or not? Will you see the film Ender's Game, which opens in wide release today? Send your questions, your comments, your thoughts to the hashtag TribTalk on Twitter and Google+. You can also leave them in the comments section of our page at sltrib.com. And for those who have not read the book or seen the movie yet, Robert, maybe you can just start us off with a brief plot narrative of Ender's Game.
Well, the book is set sometime in the near future, I guess, maybe 100 years from now. An alien race has attacked the Earth many years before, and we're sort of warded off, but they're expected to return, and so the Earth is trying to prepare, and they're preparing by training children to be the military leaders, and Ender is one of these children. He's the sort of the last hope of human civilization. And so the book is his adventures as he becomes really a great military commander.
He seems very conflicted. I mean, torn by his compassion on one side and the violence of the reality in his world. Eric, I mean, does that sort of sum up the character that Ender is?
I think that sums it up quite well. I'm not as familiar with the book as Bob is, but I'll take his word for it.
Well, the book, when it was published 30-some years ago, received some critical acclaim. It won top honors in science fiction work. What makes this particular book so compelling in the literary scheme of things, Robert?
Well, it is about this conflict that you mentioned. I mean, Ender is really a good person at heart, but he winds up doing some bad things as he's being trained, and many of them he doesn't realize he's done bad things, but he feels terribly guilty afterwards. And so it's really about his inner feelings and what his character is. So it's a compelling adventure story, but it's also got this other level.
When did BYU start collecting manuscripts and first editions of Card's work, and why, Robert?
Orson Scott Card is one of probably the most successful LDS authors of our generation, and he began giving us his papers back in the 70s, so before he was really very famous. So I think he probably figured he was going to be famous, and so we've been collecting ever since, and we've been collecting his published work as well as his papers at a high level, just to complement the papers collection.
And what can people see in this exhibit, Eric?
We have, in addition to some of the manuscripts that Bob mentioned, we've got many different languages, different translations of the book. in different languages, from Galician. How do you say that, Bob?
That's right.
To
Galician.
Turkish, to Chinese, Galician, Hebrew. Wouldn't have known that the book has been translated in so many different languages, but we have them in the exhibit. And we also have just received some other items that we're going to be putting into the cases. Some replica spaceships, battleships from the movie that were printed on a 3D printer that we're really excited about. We just got, and late editions are always welcome if they're interesting and fascinating enough, which we think they are.
But we do have, Jennifer, excuse me, we have the story began as a short story, and so we have in the exhibit the original manuscript of the short story that Card sent in to be published, as well as the first manuscript of the novel.
Speaking with Robert Maxwell, he's curator of the Orson Scott Card Collection at Brigham Young University. Also with us, Eric Howard, a designer of the new exhibit Cards Game, which opens at the BYU Harold B. Lee Library today. And also Tribune film critic Sean P. Means talking about Ender's Game, the movie, the book, and the very controversial author Orson Scott Card. Can you separate a work of art from the artist who created it, and why or why not are you planning to see the film? You can send your questions and comments to the hashtag TribTalk on Twitter and Goo+. Also leave them in the comment section of our page at sltrib.com. Sean, in addition to your review of the film, you explore this dichotomy between very engaging, well-constructed, exceptional art and the controversial personal views or behaviors of the artist. Can you sort of lay out some of the statements that Orson Scott Card has made recently?
Well, his views about homosexuality and gay marriage have been out there for a good long time. There's actually quite a good sampler of it on Salon.com, where he has talked about how homosexuality is caused by molestation and abuse, that everyone who's gay has been abused in their lives. He has written about how he believes that the push toward same-sex marriage in the courts and in states around the country is a threat to democracy. And he said some things that have been pretty nasty and pretty demonizing towards the gay community. And then in the last couple of years, as the fight for same-sex marriage has been succeeding, has been winning at the Supreme Court and other levels, he's been wanting to claim tolerance against his views from the people that he has in the past been intolerant of, which strikes a lot of people in the gay community and elsewhere as being very hypocritical. So that's just a nutshell, and you can dig into the readings in the book and what he has to say about it for yourself. What I find interesting in all this is that, first off, it's been a corporate decision by the companies that are releasing this movie, Ender's Game, to separate themselves from Orson Scott Card, but while promoting and trying to sell this movie. Orson Scott Card was not at the world premiere in Los Angeles on Monday. He has not been involved in the press lead up to the film. It's been the director, it's been the stars, and he's been very conspicuous in his absence from all this, from the studio, and in large part because there have been LGBT groups that have wanted to start a boycott of the film, and in order to sort of placate that group or those groups and placate not just people who are LGBT but people who share those views, they've tried to distance the movie from the creator of the original work,
including the director, as you note. I mean,
right.
And he makes the statement, as you report, that it is possible to separate great art, from a flawed artist. talk a little bit about how, I mean, does that sort of work into the publicity machine of this film, or not?
Well, it does in this case, in the sense that the overall message of the movie and the book is one of tolerance, where you have Ender being trained to be a warrior and being trained to fight against this implacable enemy. But as he is learning and as he's growing, he's realizing that this implacable enemy may have an opinion as well, and may have some validity to their side of the story, and that is a very and how that runs afoul of the military minds that are trying to train him to be a fighting machine, to be a killer, and as we talked about, the balance between his violent side and his compassionate side is a very, very much a message of tolerance, and and the director of the film, Gavin Hood, has said that seems strangely at odds with what Orson Scott Card has said in his political commentary and social commentary about homosexuality, about same-sex marriage, and those issues.
It's interesting, in your column you point out that Card is far from the only artist out there with a lot of flaws on display. You talk about Wagner, the opera classical music composer, Jackson Pollock, the accomplished artist. I mean, go through some of these artists and what the backstory is behind the art that we so admire.
Right. Well, I mean, Richard Wagner, basically reinvented what we think of as a modern opera with the Ring series, with Ride of the Valkyries and all this. But his characters and his have been noted by many scholars as possibly being anti-Semitic, and that some of his writings and views in 19th century Germany were anti-Semitic. Then there's the small fact that one of his biggest fans, of course, this is after he was dead, so it's not his fault, but one of his biggest fans was Adolf Hitler. And you get into the sort of side issue of, can you be held responsible for the people that like your stuff long after you're gone? Jackson Pollock is a great example. He had, a great many personal issues that have been well documented: alcoholism, womanizing. He had a mistress, so on and so forth. Michael Jackson would be a great recent example. I mean, his music has been beloved around the world, but his personal behavior, which started out looking as kind of quirky and unusual, the hyperbaric chamber, the taking the chimp to the Grammys, whatever, but then getting into the more, the accusations of child molestation, and how the fact that it's only been after Michael Jackson died that a lot of music critics and scholars were able to sort of separate the person from the artwork, from the work that he left behind.
Robert Maxwell, as curator of the card collection at BYU, I'm curious, when did these views, these sort of extreme social views, start coming to the surface with Card?
Well, he's been writing social commentary for a long time, and I don't know the exact date of the kind of the original thing that people cite. It's sort of maybe 20 years ago. He wrote an article. Actually, he gave a talk at BYU on some of these issues. So he's been writing for a long time, but it's kind of recent that he's been kind of rather more extreme about it, I think. I would like to say it's interesting that he does have homosexual characters in his fiction, and they are usually treated sympathetically. They aren't demonized. So it's an interesting paradox, I think, as Sean says.
Has he ever illuminated that sort of disconnect?
I can't think of anything right now that he's written about that, but it's hard to judge him because when he writes in his fiction, it seems to be a different story than what he writes in his social commentary.
Eric Howard, does the controversy surrounding Card make its way into the BYU exhibit?
No, we are focusing on our collection and how people can appreciate Orson Scott Card's works and come and check out, personally come to the library and see these manuscripts and use them and research them and study them. It's quite fascinating, actually, to see that some of these, to flip through some of the manuscripts that have Orson Scott Card's notes and personal thoughts and questions to be asking James Cameron, for instance, on the Abyss. It's manuscript that we have in there for that, the screenplay. Yeah, we wanted to focus on Orson Scott Card's work and how people can interact and study him here in the library.
Speaking with Eric Howard, the designer of a new exhibit at BYU called Cards Game, which opens today. Also, a curator of the Orson Scott Card Collection at BYU, Robert Maxwell, and Tribune film critic Sean P. Means, talking about Ender's Game, the book, the controversy surrounding this author. If you'd like to join us, you can send your questions to the hashtag TribTalk on Twitter and Google+. Also put them in the comment section at sltrib.com. I want to get to some of those. You can also put them in the Facebook page, the Salt Lake Tribune's Facebook page, and quite a few comments there. Serenity writes, the book was amazing, but Card is a homophobe. I suppose it takes a sick man to envision such a horrible future society, hell-bent on eradicating a race of beings. This comment from Matthew Canfield: I read the books a few years ago, really enjoyed them. However, I do not support his views. I will see the movie for the visual adaptation it was meant to be. This from Aaron Nelson: I don't think you should judge art by the artist. Should we judge Ezra Pound's work because he was a fascist? Should we judge Edgar Allan Poe's work because he was an addict? Should we judge Mark Twain's work because he was a Confederate soldier? Should we judge Orson Card's work because he went mentally ill toward the end of his life? I don't think so. Sean Means, where do you come down on that question?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be up to everybody's individual choice. I mean, there is this LGBT boycott against the movie. I would not recommend that. I've talked to Troy Williams, the local activist. He's very much against boycotts of that sort, in part because he thinks it's more important to sort of constructively engage in dialogue than to do something negative like a boycott. I don't think you should boycott the movie because of Card's views. I think you should avoid the movie just because it's not a particularly good movie. As I have in the review in the paper today, I think it's kind of boring. It's sort of like watching somebody else play a video game. So on that level, I would say, yeah, don't bother with the film, but don't do it as a political statement. Don't do it as you want to get back at Orson Scott Card. You want to deny him money or deny him the profits he may get out of this thing. It does always come down to an individual choice, and you have some artists who the artwork does not reflect what their personality is, what their other personal or political views are. You have some artists who do. I mean, you can't really separate Ernest Hemingway's history of adventure and personal violence and womanizing and alcoholism from the art from his writings, because they sort of go together. Same way, you talk about the homophobia, for example, of Eminem, which is very clear in the lyrics he writes. You can't really separate that from the artist. But with Card, it is a case where there are homosexual characters in his books. There are these messages of tolerance. So it does seem to be that there is a divide between what he does in his professional life and what he does in his personal or political or his role as a social commentator. But I think it is going to be up to each individual person to decide, okay, what do I want to support? Where do I want to vote with my money?
This is from Amber McIntosh. Only if those opinions make it into their work, a la Ayn Rand. So it looks like a lot of people say that they can make the distinction between what is written on the page or seen on the screen and the person behind that. And Robert, I guess that's a tradition that we've seen throughout the history of art.
I think that's right, and I think it is interesting how, I've read all of these things that have been recently posted in different blogs and sites about Orson Scott Card, and many people say, oh, I love the book, and then all of a sudden I changed my mind when I learned about the author. So it's interesting how learning about the creator of a work can change our perception of that work.
Initially, the work was hailed as a science fiction classic, and yet people were very squeamish about having children sort of perpetuate violence in society. That was a strong criticism of Ender's Game when it first came out.
That's right, and of course it is It's well, you didn't mention, but it's been. I think you meant. Well, maybe you did, but it's been used actually in military training. It's recommended for at some of the military colleges for reading, and of course it would be because it is, and it seems to be a. I mean, it's directed towards military training, but there is that aspect that you mentioned. That's for sure.
Sean Means, you don't really like this movie, so I mean, what went wrong? It had, big-time actors. It certainly had an accomplished director behind it. It had a budget.
Right.
What happened?
I think that there's just sort of a blandness took over the entire operation. The visual effects are very, they're very technically proficient, but they do sort of have this sort of video game quality to them, and there's sort of a sterility about the look of the whole film. You also have young actors. Asa Butterfield is actually a really good young actor. He starred in Hugo, the Scorsese film. And you have, he does a fine job with the role. On the other side, you have Harrison Ford as the gruff commander, and his performance is sort of a one-note thing, and he has a sort of warmongering Dick Cheney-esque sort of approach to the character does anyway. And Ford, I thought was kind of bland and kind of one note in the role. So I want to get back to the idea of whether you can separate art from the artist because it comes off sounding like this is very much politically correct. Say it again. Politically correct liberals going after this conservative, and the thing is, there are examples of it going the other way. I mean, how many right-wingers dumped their Dixie Chicks albums after the statements made against George Bush in the Gulf War? They're not to say every side does it, but there is a lot of back and forth on this issue and trying to figure out where, like I said, where the split comes.
Eric, what are you hoping that people who attend the exhibit what's the takeaway for them?
Takeaway from the exhibit is that there are some fascinating works that Card has produced over decades. The fact that this movie has come out many decades after it was written is quite interesting, and so we want people to come and explore that and understand sort of a little what were some of the thoughts that Card put into this, in his handwritten notes. You can find that out really no other way than by reading what he wrote in his notes and on the side on his thoughts that he scribbled on the side of the manuscripts and the screenplay. It's really quite fascinating to see that unique view of the author and how that feeds into the way that the story is represented in the film.
And Sean, I guess the takeaway from the film is meh, but also, is it partly that this particular book didn't translate well to the big screen?
Well, in this case, I haven't read the book, so I would not be able to say how much of the fault lies in the book and how much of it lies in the adaptation. I would tend to guess, just from the sort of lasting popularity of the book, that there's probably a lot more there than was able to get out onto the screen.
I think if I could say something, I think it's interesting that Sean, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I think it's interesting that Sean thinks that there's this video game quality to it, and that really was the theme of the book. I mean, the training was by video games, and so that's interesting that maybe it purposely came across that way. Maybe it was a mistake in the film, but that's actually a part of the story itself.
Robert Maxwell, he's curator of the Orson Scott Card Collection at Brigham Young University. Eric Howard, designer of the new exhibit Cards Game, which opens today at the BYU Harold B. Lee Library. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the time.
You're welcome.
Great to be here.
And Sean Means is our film critic here at the Trib. Thanks to you. And Sean, again, 2 stars, right?
2 stars.
2 stars. You can read Sean's article.
Always wish it could be better,
You can read Sean's article as well as the cricket blog at sltrib.com. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce. Thanks for tuning into Trib Talk today. Have a great day.